We're live.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's stream, which is about tech and design. Because as we know, games, being tech beasts themselves, require the right tools for the right job. Today, my colleague Eric, say hi,
Hi.
and I will be discussing some of your concepts and explain to you why you should go with either quantum or fusion and what the reasoning is behind that. So, Eric, I know you've been browsing the Discord channels a lot, just like I have over the last couple of days, including the weekend. Is there any particular type of game that you feel like starting with?
You mean any type of game I would start with
No, any
myself?
type of the core loops that you've heard about that you'd like to kick off the conversation with today.
I liked a lot of the ideas, but I'm excited to check the forums if we have anything. I think we
All right,
should
so
prioritize that one and then we go through the.
then we have two here, and both are physics types games. So I think that's going to bring us towards a nice direction to see why and when we might want to use quantum rather than fusion. How about that?
Yes.
All right. So the first one, and that is going to be a shoe in, is if somebody wanted to build a game kind of like Fall Guys. That is a
I'm
question that we have here already. So
I'm trying to read the full thing, so just give me a second because I'm trying to wrap the text.
so it's a game like Fall Guys on one map
Yes.
in co-op, team versus team, and the different team members of red and blue can reconnect with each other in order to help the others with a rope to, you know, bridge gaps and grant them various abilities.
So I like this already because I it's interesting because it relates a bit to a prototype I wrote once, which was I wrote a little prototype it was a 2D top down where you
Mm,
connect to someone else and you would have this electric ray going between the two of you and you could try to snap someone with it or avoid someone snapping you with their ray. So you were connected to this other player and you'd have to navigate
exactly.
the map with that. So the idea of so I'll very briefly comment about this topic. So um, I have no affiliation to Fall Guys and to Mediatonic, and it's a very cool game and it introduced a very set of interesting set of mechanics. And the interesting fact is that if you want to do physics based um, experiences in multiplayer, you have always the problem of how do you solve against lag, and the answer to that is of course having full having prediction of physics, so the way you interact with physics objects feel local. And although fusion and quantum are both capable of doing full physics prediction, in fusion in particular you are limited to the fact that Unity uses PhysX, and PhysX, although it's a great physics engine, it's not designed for predict rollback. So if you're talking about a lot of interactive objects moving around, or even the characters moving around, and you interacting with them, it may become the bottleneck for you.
Hmm.
So whenever I hear a lot of physics involved, I tend to recommend going for quantum because quantum also tick accurate does full physics prediction, but because it uses our custom tailored physics engine that is designed for predict rollback, you tend to not have that sort of issues you would have with physics, right? So the concepts are essentially the same. You can do full physics prediction of rigid bodies on physics, same way as you do with the quantum's physics engine, but it's normally easier to set up and just trust and performance will be there for most use cases. So I would do it with Quantum. It's also interesting to mention that a game that has very similar mechanics in that players play around bumping into each other, which is called Stumble Guys, is made with Quantum. So that basically answers the question. If you see the differences between games like Fall Guys and Stumble Guys, you see that Stumble Guys is a lot more fast paced. And the reason it's because it can use full physics prediction. I don't know exactly how Fall Guys was done or works, but it's super fast paced because with Quantum's prediction you can do it, and essentially, yeah, it would work just fine. I
Yeah,
would use it even on the
including on
mobile.
mobile. I think
Yes.
that is
Oh,
the,
WebGL, yeah.
that's the thing to
So
take away
with
here.
with
But
that
now,
team, no question, yeah.
yeah, and so, but then again, now we just said, yeah, quantum perfect for these kind of physics interactions. But now, if we were to go with something that is a bit more with ragdolls, we would, of course, come into a whole different type of issue, because then we have the physics interaction, but we have also this whole jiggling around on the local view that might or might not be part of the actual gameplay, right?
Yes, you mentioned Ragdolls. I was already going to talk about this difference, which is, are you talking about really simulating the ragdolls so the ragdolls are part of the gameplay, they influence the gameplay a bit like the single player Humans Fall Flat kind of
Mm,
thing, or you were talking about ragdolls as a comic effect in terms of how you end
yes.
up looking on the visuals. So depending on what you're talking about here, so if ragdolls are purely a visual thing, for especially for example if you were falling or if you got bumped into so on, it doesn't really matter if you're using, if you should use quantum or fusion. It would be more a question of what are the other requirements on the game that would
Mm,
recommend you to use one or the other. um, so it would be the other kind of mechanics that would actually matter. But if ragdolls are to be part of the gameplay,
mm,
then that's a very very tricky one, because ragdolls are essentially, you turn a character into a lot of rigid bodies connected by joints. So it's
mm.
essentially something very expensive to run. And
Yeah.
I would personally tend to do a ragdoll based game in Fusion, but pay a lot of attention to this. I would not use client side prediction. I would try to do a bit like what I think Fall Guys does, which is run server only. And the client, you only predict kind of like the look, or you do some visual feedback that you are turning directions, but you actually make sure everything is only computed on the server, because it means the
Mm.
ragdolls are going to be computed only forward. You never roll back a ragdoll, because rolling back a ragdoll is extremely
The
expensive.
expensive,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
right.
and 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 building ragdolls with quantum joints is also going to be a bit on the expensive side, because you are, yeah, it's something that is much cleaner to do forward only. So I would do infusion only server, would not predict local physics, would do
Mm.
visual prediction of the looks and some animation, so I you notice that you press the feedback, but make the game slow paced, so so
So you
ragdolls
can,
can actually fit into multiplayer. making
yeah.
making multiplayer ragdolls is a very very challenging thing.
And I think this is also the perfect time to kind of remind people that a lot of the things you see in multiplayer are not technical challenges. They're really all of these smoke and mirrors that we have to have in order to afford the time for things to travel across the internet. So there's, when you say slow paced, it's again not because it has to be slow, but rather because it takes time for information to arrive from A to B, regardless of how good your
Yeah,
connection is.
and if you cannot run local prediction, which is the only thing that would allow you to have immediate feedback, if you cannot
Yeah,
do that, one way to mask the latency is to make the game slow paced. So players already know that if you're turning a bus, you press left, it doesn't immediately turn. It takes a
yeah,
while. You give some visual cues that something is happening, but it will take a while. So that masks the fact that you're actually running physics only on the server. So just
exactly.
just because both fusion and quantum are capable of doing full physics prediction, it doesn't mean that you have to use this in every single case you have, right? So
Yeah.
doing
So,
ragdoll on the gameplay movement, I would do with fusion client
mm,
server, running physics only on the server.
so there is Now we have a very, very different kind of request. And I saw this already in the form, but we had that user posted again here in the chat. So the question, and I think this is a very interesting conversation. So one part of it is VR, whereas the other part is bullet hell. That is a very tough combination, isn't it?
In a VR bullet hell,
Yeah.
it is. So bullet hells are. I mean, you have challenges on rendering a lot of projectiles, but you also have a lot of challenges to compute these bullets, especially on multiplayer, because timing is everything.
Yeah.
So I would not I would not answer like use this or that with a bullet hell in VR. If it because I need more information to
Context.
have an informed, yeah, more context to have a more informed
And I think I
opinion.
do have the context here. So they mentioned Xorkas from the lab. And
Yeah, I
this
saw
is
it here. Let me see.
VR, but the bullets in this case are fairly slow.
Ah,
So that, in my
okay.
opinion, would be tentative more towards fusion. If we were talking a classical bullet hell that was top-down 2D, Quantum would be the better choice. What would you think?
I'm asking 30 seconds because I'm watching some food.
All right.
Yeah, okay, I can see. Yeah, interesting. Ah, you know what? I will do this in quantum.
Even in VR?
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, quantum is ideal for having what you see is what you get physics, right? Because it can predict rollback very quickly. And you're talking about a lot of colliders that you want to go towards you. So those colliders, you want them to feel like real physics objects that if you dodge
Hmm.
and you feel like you dodged, it actually worked. So those
Yes.
colliders must be in predicted timing. So you have two choices. You either go for quantum and just run full physics prediction because quantum does that automatically. So go for quantum and have those as regular colliders, and they would just scale fine for this use case. Or if you do fusion on that, you need the projectile the bullets to be fully predicted. So on the local client, you have the same timing. I mean, the bullets are on the tick you are simulating with the local prediction. So
Hmm.
it means I would not use actual physics for the colliders if you're doing this in Fusion. I would do them delta raycast based, which is you move them
Right.
one frame at a time doing a raycast, and then you can check, for example, against where the positions are without actually resimulating physics. So it's a bit trickier to do it that way. Whereas in
Hmm.
quantum, it would just work. So I would do this one in quantum myself.
All right. Well, there you go. So we have kind of an adjacent question, if you don't mind.
Yes, of
Um,
course.
somebody's asking here whether we're still considering the experimental stateless physics API with Fusion. I think here the key word is experimental,
Yeah, I mean,
which is
it's a very interesting question, a very good question,
I
because
know.
we also consider the stateless physics engine from Unity.
Hmm.
We have been, we discussed about it internally, and it is
I
we're
mean, some people
still.
have successfully used it in their prototypes as well.
Yes, the point is because it is experimental, we cannot commit to doing anything with it. But
Yeah.
what we can say is that we considered a lot about it, and we essentially have two options to have super physics based games, let's say, easier to do with Fusion. Because let me be clear with that, uh, to do full predictable back of anything in with Fusion, the bottleneck is not Fusion itself, but the fact that if you want physics to do full prediction, is the physics engine that Unity uses by default, which is great, but is not designed for predictable rollback. So
Yeah.
the stateless Unity physics one is. So, but because it's experimental, we cannot commit to using it until it is
Yes.
considered something that they are gonna really commit to,
So
and keep
we
doing
are
updates.
hoping
They,
that it
but
will be released and stable, and then we
yeah,
can look into it more actively. That is the
if
short
and
version of
when
it.
if and when they release it as a stable, no
Hmm,
question about it, we'll take a look and we'll try to integrate it into Fusion because it would make total sense. Um,
it would.
but there is another path that we're considering internally, which is we already have a great predict rollback
Right.
physics engine of our
For
own, which is the one
quantum,
from
yeah.
Quantum. So the other consideration we have is actually to port it to use floating point numbers and just use it inside Fusion. So that's the other option we
So
have for the future. We cannot promise
yeah.
any of those, but just being totally open to what are the options we have internally to move forward with that topic.
Yeah. So, you have there you have your answer. And I think now let's move on to another genre. Somebody was suggesting, okay, they want to tackle the best use of bots by having essentially the players create bots that then fight against each other. This is a very tricky one, I feel, given the dynamic nature that is required here.
Um, Let me get a few things here before I answer anything. You're talking about the entry in our forum?
Yes.
Build your own battle bots with physics-based damage systems. This leaves me with a lot of questions, so I'd like to address this by explaining the questions I have in my mind and giving the suggestions what I would use. So by physics-based damage systems, I'm not sure what this means. Are you talking about like the different parts can be broken and then the the bot would not have that anymore and then it changes the way it moves around? So think about a car that if you remove one wheel, it would actually only have three wheels and it would go like that. So that would it depends, right? So in the end, it depends more on, do you want the physicality of rigid bodies to be exact? And then is it fast paced or is it more slow paced? Because if it feels a lot like a fighting game where your bots are super fast and they're breaking apart and you have physics, then I would lean toward quantum. But I think this example leaves so many things in the air that I would say you are talking about bots, so you do not even need it to be reactive to your inputs. So here's the key, because you are building the bots and the bots are AI driven from what I understood,
Hmm.
you don't need client side prediction on this one. It's
No.
super cool to have this super accurate tick based stuff. It would look gorgeous. But I would do this one fusion with client server, either dedicated or player hosted, right?
Hmm.
Running physics only on the server. And then you just use physics. You attach, detach, you remove, and you make these things network rigid bodies, and it would be a lot like doing a regular
Yeah.
Unity
And
example.
that actually kind of answers, I suppose, also Super Soup Games' question whether, Fusion with its rollback netcode could do physics games. And, this is,
Let
as we mentioned prior, it's a question of cost, as in
I
how
like
much
to
CPU
tackle
time
his
does it cost?
question because his question, I apologize if I'm understanding wrong, but I think it touches into a misconception. So
Hmm.
a fusion server never rolls back, so it only moves
Oh, very
forward.
good point. Yeah.
So a fusion server is relatively lightweight. What is expensive, let's say, on the server are two things. So you have the network processing, which is super optimized, but if you're talking about having 200 players, of course, building the packets for 200 players starts to show up on a profiler. Same goes for bandwidth consumption on a server with 100 plus players or so. And the third thing that can be expensive on a server is if you have a super large world with full of NPCs moving around all the time constantly. You do not pause any of those.
Hmm.
So that becomes expensive. But apart from these, a Fusion server is absurdly lean. It's super lightweight because it only moves forward. It never
Yeah,
rolls
true.
back. Who rolls back are the clients. So in quantum, everybody rolls back and resimulates. And of course, because of prediction culling, you can make the forward, the complete simulation of the whole world be only, it's forward only, and it is, you can make it, you basically, you can limit your prediction to an area here, but you still have to simulate forward everything. So in
Mm,
quantum is like everybody is equivalent to a fusion server plus a small client doing predict rollback here.
mm.
Whereas in fusion, a server only moves forward and the client always rolls back what you see and so on.
Very
So
good points.
yeah, it
So,
depends.
you know, I think this kind of gives you the gist of it. But how about we go a bit above throughout the categories that we have here and see what we think about those in and of
Can
themselves.
can I ask the question we have on the
Go ahead, yeah.
stream? So
I as soon
moving
as it came up,
platforms,
I
my
knew you would want to
favorite
dive into that
question.
one.
So
This is before you answered, may I just point out we have actually a complete stream on this very subject that you can watch on our channel.
yeah, so but I'll answer very shortly. Moving platforms are not a technical challenge. So essentially, it is a game design challenge. Should you put moving platforms in predicted timing or in snapshot timing, if you think about it, right? So in quantum, this question is easily answered because quantum puts everything in predicted timing. So essentially, you always have everything predicted. So both characters and platforms are on the same timing. So solving moving platforms in quantum is the same as solving platforms in a single player game. Then on fusion, the thing is that on a shooter, you
Uh,
you use dual timing. Why? Because it's fun to play with dual timing. It's
yeah.
fun to shoot as you see, and people are on snapshots because you were seeing them in the past, but you have to like compensate on the server. So you use two timings. Your character is on predicted timing, other characters are in snapshot timing, and that works great for shooting, but then creates a question for you: where should I put the platforms on? Predicted or
Mm,
moving timing? No matter the choice you do, you're gonna lose one thing about shooting accuracy or your movement accuracy. So there
mm.
is a great answer by Iri and Irka on our previous. You can share the video, Tim, where they discuss this topic on how they did it with the PR200 sample, and it's
Oh yeah,
publicly on
we'll
the
dive
video
more into
already.
that on
But
Wednesday again.
yes, yeah, we're
Definitely.
gonna. It's a nicer thing to ask on Wednesday. Yes.
Yeah. It's like if you want, in terms of development, platforms are these easy things, just like doors are. They're very simple until you have to think about them.
Yeah. So just to follow up on Super Soup games, I mean, both Quantum and Fusion do client-side prediction tick-based, which is accurate tick-based. When you say extrapolation, I actually think about one extra step, extrapolation step, because both Quantum and Fusion are by definition already extrapolating client-side prediction compared to the data you have on the server, or in case of Quantum, the data you have confirmed inputs for that came from the server. So both are extrapolating ahead with client-side prediction tick-based. What I call extrapolation is the extra step to do one extra simulation step that is not tick-based but actually render time-based. And yes, you can do it with both. It's a little bit more involved to do it, but for example, the KCC add-on for Fusion already shows how you do that because it actually does one extra step on super high accurate monitors. You are running 240 hertz,
Mm.
and it actually does one extra partial timing movement to make sure it's super accurate to the rendering time and not interpolating that, but actually extrapolating that. So yeah,
Oh, Soup Games meant they wanted you to expand, not they didn't want the extrapolate slash interpolate comparison. But I think this is really, um, you know, like here we're going into very like tech
yeah,
heavy details that I think
yeah,
might be better answered
yeah.
during. one
Go
of
back
our
to the
longest
question you
Q&A
had
sessions.
before I answered derp, and and we also have another entry on the forum, but you can go back to the question you had before, so I take that one first.
That I had before.
You were
Um,
asking me something, and then I'm sorry,
right,
interrupted
right.
you. Yeah.
So what I wanted to circle back to, but we can do that after Praveen's question here in the form, is to kind of take a shot at the categories afterwards.
Hmm. Okay,
Um,
let's answer this one, and then
but
we go to the categories, which is what
exactly,
we
let's do
agreed to
that.
do. So, multiplayer design space in VR, where two or more people can enter a 3D room and design together from a huge catalog of dynamic downloadable 3D models. To choose from, I would say yes.
Yeah. So the question is, will fusion work?
It will
FYI.
work. Yes, it will work. This is a very interesting one because, just to be clear, I thought a lot about this problem because it's it I mean a shareable design space. It's an industry application for training and for
It is. It
meetings and
is.
so on. So we have a lot of customers trying to do that and doing that. We have a customer doing one with Quantum. I will not mention which company and what it is, but I am baffled by what they ended. I think they have 50,000 entities with predict rollback in Quantum running live with their customers in a training application where you can assemble very complex things and so on. So I don't have the details, and of course I'm not gonna mention the names for obvious reasons, but it's very interesting what they came up with. But the point is, you have to be careful with what you exchange in terms of data. You do not want, for
Yeah.
example, to modify a 3D mesh and send the 3D mesh over the network. That's not going to work. So I was thinking, if you were, for example, on a meeting and you are designing a space where you are referencing different 3D models and you are basically modifying a transform of each one of these models or
Hmm.
playing with the colors of these models. These are the things you are networking about. And then, yes, Fusion works just fine. And you can compose with many of those because Quantum would only send the changes you do on each individual part. But you have to, in the
Hmm.
end, you have to see what is the data that you're putting as networked and how much
Hmm.
of it are you changing uh, every time you change something. So if you can be smart about that, I mean, it doesn't matter the amount of data you put in, as long as the parts you change are not a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah,
So, but this also kind of brings us to one of the questions from Forest Games of whether there are any VR quantum samples. The short answer is no.
no. Why? Because, well, Quantum was not or is not yet free for development, so we focused a lot of efforts on Fusion, and Fusion has some characteristics that, in general, for VR, it makes it easier to start from. So VR has a very it's still almost in its infancy. So if you just consider what is the interaction toolkit you should use, none of them is perfect. None of them is actually designed for multiplayer. They all have
And that
pros
is the
and
key
cons,
point, though.
and that's the
It's
key
like
points, right? So just
most of
supporting.
them are black boxes that are stateful, which means it's very hard for you to control anything. We've had a few studios who did that with great success, but those that have the most success are those that actually build a VR multiplayer stack themselves because they understand what is required to be stateless.
I Yeah, I mean, yeah. So the point is, we do have. I can mention a couple of things. So I will mention two games that are live, and one is Fusion and one is Quantum, both VR. So the new the Nerf game on VR, that's done with Fusion. It's an official game done with Fusion. Then you have Wands, the game about magicians throwing spells and so on. Once alliances, it's done with Quantum. It's a great
Hmm.
team. So play them and see which one you like the most. But in essence, you can do with either, right? I wanna
Yeah.
I wanna give a quick rundown to the stuff being said here on YouTube, Tim, because I think there are a few misconceptions here. So
Yes, please.
um, I am so jealous in Fusion. I struggle to have 50 predicted objects. Well, Derp, this depends. So I said like 50,000 entities, but I'm not saying 50,000 physics-based entities. I would not. I mean, it's not designed for 50,000 colliders that are moving. We normally benchmark on a PC with up to 1,000. That's a more realistic number for predict rollback physics parts. They have
Hmm.
50,000 entities, which is equivalent to 50,000 game objects, not necessarily doing a full physics
Hmm.
prediction on all of those. I would not even run 50 on Fusion. I mean, predict rollback in physics objects, 50 of them in Fusion. You can do a lot more predict rollback objects if they're not physics objects. But I would not even do 50 because of physics expense here. Um, so, what else?
I think there's. Yeah. So first of all, quantum and MMOs, just no. That's just
MMOs, not yet.
no.
Is not yet, no. But yeah,
With
yeah.
fusion, no. Like if we take MMOs as massive multiplayer, as in the scale of World of Warcraft, then the answer here is no as well. If we're talking small niche MMOs, such as the ones that you sometimes see in Asia, for instance, with up like 100, 150 players that are more RPG like, so a bit slower, this you could build with Fusion.
I
But
mean,
again, this is not what most
people
people
have
understand here.
totally different understandings of what an MMO means. I mean, a proper MMO like World of Warcraft is important to mention is not made of one single approach. So they're not
True.
using. So let's say their internal team built something like Fusion, whatever it is. Uh, and it works out around that. No, normally you have a different approach for when you go into a raid. You have a
Mm,
different networking approach for the overworld. Normally you have a lot more client authority on the overworld, so it is
mm.
light on the servers. But if you go on a raid or on a PvP arena, that has server authority or determinism. So it's made of a set of different pieces, right? So and it's about the smoke and mirrors as well. So you can combine different things and get something that looks a lot like an MMO. So if you think about or it is an MMO in that sense. But the classic EVE Online kind of MMO with 3,000 people or 30,000 people on the same server running at 1 tick per second. No, not yet. We
That's a
think about
different.
it, but I cannot say too much yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So, um, I think this is we can take Soup Game's question here as it is a perfect jumping off point to moving afterwards to the categories and see what fits best in there. And the question was, for a team that does make multiplayer games, not just one, but in general, which one should be chosen, Quantum or Fusion? Which I think is a valid question, but one that is filled with assumptions that we kind of need to pull out here before answering.
What is the question here, Tim, on the list?
Basically, being if a team wanted to just focus on making multiplayer games and only multiplayer games as an indie team, should
Hmm.
they choose Quantum or Fusion or can it be swapped in between? The answer is those are two separate paradigms. You don't
Yeah,
just move from one to the other
very
with your
easily.
code base.
No, yeah, I would pick one of them. I mean,
And I
it's a
personally
very
would
good
favor
question again. We have
Quantum.
very good questions today.
I would favor Quantum just because it allows you to have all your gameplay programmers focus on gameplay rather than the
I would
network state.
I would not go so fast. I mean, I think it depends heavily on the kind of designs you're leaning
Fair enough.
towards, right? If you're going towards more survival style games, if you have a games that are very streamable, but you want to have something like, I mean, a lot of games feel really lean towards player hosted, really, and these player hosted games, they're very cost efficient as well for the developer, because you do not have necessarily to run dedicated servers.
Mm,
And so you can just make a whole career building state transfer games with that. And then if your design leans more towards the stuff that fits like Quantum, which is lots of little physics sandbox kind of things, physics interactions,
mm,
a fair amount of online players, but you're not leaning towards 100, 200. And especially if you're going mobile, then just jump into Quantum and start building stuff. Which just brings to my last comment. I'm sorry, we have great questions here, but I'll do one last comment on this topic, which is sometimes we're in this today. We're getting the design ideas, and then we're talking about which tech to use. But another thing I personally like to do, because I work so much with Quantum and so much with Fusion, is that sometimes I just take the restrictions that one brings,
mm.
and I start to make sure I create a great game that fits that, which is
Yeah,
another way to think about it. So
this is
just
a
take
great
Stumble
point.
Guys, which is bringing this genre to mobile in a bang way.
Yeah,
So you
I
have
mean it's a
so
very good
much
point.
cool
This is
stuff you
like,
can do that you cannot do with other stuff with Quantum. And then the same with Fusion. You can do
mm,
super tick accurate animation, shooting, and so on, and a survival game with host migration. Nobody
yeah.
had host migration in any networking tech for Unity before, unless they built themselves, which is a valid approach as well. But
I mean, I think,
get
at this
just yeah,
point, like it is like there's this basic exercise. I mean, that you will find at most game development schools, as a matter of fact, which is leveraging technological affordances for design. Which means simply exactly what you said, looking at what you have to use and just making it work. I mean, this is half what game development is. Like, anytime you read a story about a post-mortem, most of the time there will be at least one or two anecdotes that are just absolutely bonkers because they ran into an issue that they have to solve with what they had at hand rather than what would be the right tool for the job.
yeah.
So, but this requires, to for people to first experiment a bit with quantum and fusion and decide, okay, what are those? And this is something you discover bit by bit.
Yep. Do you
All
want to?
right.
Let's go through the
Through
categories
the
now.
through the categories. Yeah, let's do that. So,
Do I have
I
it
think
open here? I
let's do
think I
bottom up. I
do.
think that, top down is such a common way to do it. Let's do it the other way around for once. Um, the first one,
Four-person
of course,
co-op
in
or
this case,
horror that I popped up here. Fusion.
the best high player count game. Yeah,
Okay,
of
no
course.
category. Let's go category. So I have it open here as well. So I know I don't. Can you? Yeah, I can get it. Sorry, I'm uh, multiplayer. It's on the other browser. Player.
Right. So, hmm?
I'm just getting the list myself so I can read while
All
you
right.
also read it to me. Sorry. So the
That's all
itch.io
good.
page, and then I'll put it in my face here.
You
This
don't
is
have it bookmarked. I mean, come on.
no, it's so easy to search. Okay,
It
I have
is like,
everything.
for me, like,
Best
honestly, I type
collaboration.
E in my
Yeah.
browser, and as soon as I is down there, that's the first page that pops up these days because I keep just bringing it up all the time. So, but yeah, so the first one, right, is what's the best tech for the high player count game? So 100 plus.
So for
Well,
100 plus, there is no question. Is you're going
Fusion.
backwards? Best high player count game. So I'm confused about this one, right? So I want to mention this because some people are talking about highest CCU on Discord, and I was confused. Do we have a high CCU category? Are we asking people to?
No. So, that's a very good point. Thank you for bringing this up.
Yeah,
So, best high player count
count.
game is not how many players are concurrently connected to your game in general, how many sessions are running, but how many people you can get in the same world to do something interesting together.
There is no question about this is fusion because quantum is limited to up to 64 for now. So this
For
can only
now.
be done. This can only be done with fusion. So it's not about CCU as the gaming global. It's about how many people you can put on the same instance of the game doing something together. And yeah, it's a challenge even to test this and so it, but it's about on the same game. So this is definitely for fusion. Then you
Mhm.
have 8 best networked physics.
Again.
This is something that when I saw it's okay, let's see how people use the stacks, but you can build great stuff with physics in quantum and you just don't worry about it. You can also do great stuff with fusion, but I lean towards if I'm doing anything with a lot of networked physics, I would just use quantum. I'm just thinking
Yeah.
about the car, the vehicle game that we're working on with the studio, which is
Oh.
gonna, yeah, I wish I
Oh
could
man, like
show it.
when this is out, I'm so looking forward to playing more
Yeah.
takes on like Twisted Metal and all that stuff.
Maybe I
That
should
they
maybe
haven't
I
been
should talk to the guys from the studio and we should host a stream about it. Even during the
definitely.
jam still perhaps. I can talk to the
Ooh, that's
guys and
gonna be
see.
tight.
It would be interesting.
But
So
let's look into that.
quantum.
So next,
7. Yeah, so which
best RTS game. Well,
quantum.
exactly. RTS games are the best example for things built with determinism, just due to the sheer amount of things that you would technically have to synchronize.
Meldon,
It-
Meldon.
exactly.
So
And
wait. So you cannot see me, right? So I have my finger pointed up because I want to comment on that. So because it's a very sensitive topic. When we mean
go ahead.
RTS here, we're talking about a fully fledged high object count RTS like Age of Empires, StarCraft, and
Yes.
so on. These are all done with determinism. You can count on one hand how many proper RTS games were done without determinism. I only know one, which is called Planet Annihilation. Something
Yes.
planetary annihilation, and that one is very interesting because it uses a semi, it's not semi-determinism because there is no semi-determinism, it's either yes or no, but it is more like it's a very interesting approach in that they transfer states based on ticks, but what the states brings is kind of like a movement command that brings where it starts and where it should end. So they call it
Mm.
curves, the chronochem curves approach. So that's almost like a hybrid approach. It is a state transfer, but it transfers the final and end state that spans across multiple frames. So you don't
Mm.
transfer the individual differences, you just transfer. You should go from here to here following this curve. And that it's a very cool compression technique.
It's also a very cool game,
It is a
as
very
a
cool
matter of
game, yeah. So that one is an RTS that was done with state transfer, but it's one of the rare cases. So I would
Mm.
just go for Quantum because it's much easier to do if you're talking about those proper RTS games. But even if you're doing just a tiny tower defense, it would be much easier to do, in my opinion, with Quantum. Next,
Next, large worlds.
a fusion. Why?
Yeah,
Because of the definition of determinism. In quantum, every
exactly.
single machine has to simulate the whole world. It doesn't have to predict and roll back the whole world because you can do what we call prediction culling. So you only predict what's very close to the camera, for example. But you do have to simulate everything in every single machine, including the lower end device you have to support. A
Mm.
very important distinction here.
Yeah.
If
And that is
one
also
low-end
why.
device is not capable of running the simulation in quantum, it will not affect the others because the server guarantees a steady stream of input, but that guy is just going to get into a death spiral himself alone and he would not be able to play, but everybody else plays fine because the server guarantees you would just receive default inputs from that guy because he's not carrying, he's not able to cope up with the simulation timing required. But
Yeah.
it's still important that the devices you plan to support are capable of simulating the whole instance. Whereas in Fusion, you only need the server to support the full game state forward, not
Mhm.
anybody else. So you can, if you have one guy with a nicer, so think about a game like
Well, BR two
Valheim.
hundred.
Of Valheim, because BR200 is not a large world. I mean, it is semi-large. I'm talking about even larger than that. That's a
Yeah,
high
fair
player
enough.
count. But if we're talking about very, very, very large game, that you have only to simulate forward. So let's say most players would not create a super big world, but let's say one guy has a beefier machine, he's able to simulate a more complex world and play with his friends, and they do not have to be on a super beefy computer because the guy running the server is. And even
Yep.
bandwidth is not going to be that much because you're going to use interest management and so on. So that's clearly a category for you to experiment with Fusion. One thing, we did not create these categories ourselves, me, team, or some of the guys from the engine development at all. They just came to us, oh, what about these categories for multiplayer? We could give an opinion at some point, but it was already done, open
Yeah,
again on this. We just happened to look at them and, oh, interesting, because many of them can be do with either. Many are clearly leaning towards using one technique or another, which
yeah. I think this is just because we have seen so many different types of games by studios, and we know what makes life easier for the developers. So I
which
think
yeah,
this is a perspective, that I think very few people have, even in the industry,
which
because most people work on one game.
yeah,
We
yeah.
help
Yeah,
dozens, hundreds of studios build theirs.
which is
So,
which brings to another topic I'd like to touch on. Although it's in the middle of the stream, many people this will pass unnoticed to most, but here it is. What I'm talking about here and what we're talking about here is not even specific to quantum versus fusion. It's essentially something between state transfer, client server state transfer
hmm,
versus determinism.
hmm,
It just happens that fusion implements state transfer, very nice way of implementing it, and quantum is arguably the best available, if not the only available deterministic engine for multiplayer out there. But it's what I'm the answers I'm giving here from my perspective, or the opinions I'm giving here, they do not apply only to fusion or quantum. Is basically between state transfer and determinism
that's
in
a very good
general.
point. Yeah, like, I mean, of course, for us it's self-evident, but
Yeah.
we probably should mention it more often.
Let's go to next one.
So,
Fast-paced game. Either.
oh, huh?
Category 5 here.
Yeah,
Best fast-paced.
that really depends on what is
Surprise
fast-paced in
us.
the gameplay. It could be
Surprise
either.
us. Could be either. Yeah, could be fusion, could be quantum. I don't know. It could be anything. Could be state
That
transfer, could be determinism. Yeah.
same for category 4, which is best peaceful game. That could really be either one. It depends on what it is you're building.
My old fishing game. That I just I mentioned this because I started the whole thing by showing how to do both physics with either either fusion or quantum. So I implemented the same model on both, and it works same equally well on both. So yeah, either. Best use of bots. Technically, either. You could use.
Yeah, but Quantum has the whole bot SDK, which makes it so nice and easy to build them.
It's so much easier to integrate bot AI into the game itself because we offer a very complete bot SDK that just works directly with the engine. It's very integrated into the engine. Whereas in Unity, yeah, you can use any AI asset store package, but you would have the thing that maybe it was not designed for multiplayer. You may have some things to make sure it integrates well within multiplayer. But arguably, you can use any AI technique from a server side and run. So the bots stuff on our forum, I would say perhaps I would even lean towards Fusion in that because you don't need to run any prediction for that. It's just server side physics, for example.
True. That would
Best,
actually, that if you do only server side, then of course you can use all the other neat tools that you have
yeah,
on the asset store that,
yeah,
are very
exactly.
good.
So that's why I'm open on this one. It doesn't really imply into
Fair
one or
enough.
the other. And I would answer one and two at the same time, either collaboration or competitive. Really, this is not enough to suggest one approach, state transfer versus the other, determinism. The other
Mm.
mechanics that are used to do the collaboration or used to be competitive, to make the game competitive. That's what matters. So
Hmm.
because you can have competitive in
This is
terms
a
of a
design question,
racing,
really.
if you're doing a racing game, a competitive racing game, Quantum. If you're doing a
Hmm.
competitive shooter, Fusion, right? So it's not the fact that it's competitive, but the type of mechanic you have in the game that I would make me choose one or the other.
I agree. I mean, these are basically, design heavy areas that have nothing to do. I mean, the tech enables the design, but first and foremost, the deciding factor is the design, not the tech.
So Super Soup Games is asking. He's saying that his 3D character controller is a physics body. Move immediately to Quantum. That's my suggestion. Running
Easy.
a hundred rigid bodies with physics predict rollback. Not sure you're gonna get there. And and I'm not even. I mean, I assume you're sure that you really need a rigid body character controller. I would tell you one game that uses rigid body character controllers. Stumble Guys.
Hmm.
It's not a KCC. It's a rigid body for those little characters. Yeah, it works great with Quantum's predict rollback physics. So it's not about transmitting the data, the problem on 2/2 here. It's about the performance of rolling back rigid bodies on physics. That's where your bottleneck's going to be. It's going to be on the clients doing the rollback on physics on the client.
Hmm.
What is the best tech
Yeah.
for a four-player co-op top-down shooter game on mobile? Quantum.
Yeah. That's
Mobile
a
co-op
straightforward one.
top-down. You go full prediction. Yeah, it doesn't need physics bullets, but you still need the colliders, and you do the raycast based. I mean, you can even do
Also,
a bullet hell with our. I mean, the stuff we have that no other physics engine has, which is the broad face queries. You can put thousands of
oh
bullets
yeah,
on mobile and perform them querying in one step without the overhead of querying individually. So no
and
question,
also
just go quantum.
also
4 player, if you want to make 40 players, it would still be quantum.
true.
You
And
can do
also
this
the
game with
last
40
part,
players on mobile, yeah.
simple zombie. So depending on the amount, that means moving from nav mesh to flow fields, which again is
Yeah,
quantum,
depending on the amount of zombies you have, your navigation. But he's talking about 4 players.
right?
So 4 players is a low player count, so you will not have a lot of NPCs, so a few couple of dozen. Nav mesh is
Well,
fine.
that depends on the quality of like the interactions. Like if you take some of the zombie shooters that have extremely powerful weapons, they'll have a couple of hundred just because you mow them down this quickly as well. So I think this really is open to interpretation.
It is, but you did this yourself, right?
Fair,
Zombie
yeah, of
stuff.
course.
And you know what you used, right? So yeah, I mean I hope we ended up being well balanced here between state transfer and determinism. I mean we don't have any bias, any I mean we don't have any business bias. For example, for us either is fine. What matters to us if you think if I can think of any of you guys as a customer. So there are different things here. So today I'm not even talking to you about as a customer, but as a fellow developer, as someone who's enthusiastic about multiplayer game development. So I'm just saying whatever I know about the topic or my experience brings. But
Mm.
um, even as a customer, when someone is a customer to us, it doesn't really matter if it is quantum or fusion from our perspective in
No,
terms of businesses. What matters is that we are only successful if the customer is successful, if the game is played by millions of players, if players enjoy the game. So it's of our best interest to give proper correct advice on what to use to make the game viable, the game successful, the game cost effective. It's because yeah, we only can be in business if the studios are or the developers themselves. Which is something a lot of people also don't know. We have a very good mix of individual developers or very small teams who made big. I mean, created super successful titles, and we also have, of course, super experienced bigger studios doing the same. So it's we have a really good balanced mix.
That is true. And so, yeah, I mean, we have another one here that goes, yeah, they're a veteran in Pun 1 and 2. And so definitely moving over to quantum or fusion,
Will feel different. Yeah.
it is. But I mean, it's well worth the jump, especially. I mean, keep in mind, Pun is great, just as is Bolt, but both of them were designed for requirements and architectures from 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's not that they're bad enough themselves, it's just that they've hit a point where they can't keep up anymore. And that's where fusion and quantum come to play, that they're not intrinsically better, they're just designed for modern requirements
I think
and
the
modern
whole
architecture.
game development community in Unity evolved a lot. I mean, I'm
Mm.
super excited with this stuff I already saw on Discord for the game jam. I mean, the kind of stuff people are pulling off on the first weekend.
Oh my god.
I mean, I was
Yes, I
part of the
agree.
original game jam in 2009, and I'm ashamed of what I built if I see what the guys are building here in one weekend. So, well, it was a 2-day jam, right? So in the end, but it's amazing how the community evolved and people got more experienced, and you have the complexity and the quality of the requirements both from
Mm,
players and from developers teams. This changed a lot in 10 years.
it
So,
did.
and also, I mean, just take for example stuff like 10 years ago, maybe a lot of good developers would already talk about non-allocation and making sure your game would be zero alloc, not doing garbage collection because that would hurt. You would create frame skips here and there and so on. Yes, of
Mm,
course, a lot of good developers would already think that, but that would not be so prevalent as it is today. I mean, anybody doing a mobile game
no.
would honestly think about that. And for example, we designed both Fusion and Quantum to be zero allocation all the time from the ground up because
Mm,
it is important to have that, right? So,
yeah.
best for top-down shooter game, I would tend lean towards Quantum,
Yeah, I agree.
but
I
but
mean,
this, yeah,
it depends on the size of the world. If we're talking like
yeah,
semi-open world top-down shooter, then fusion is back in the game. But generally speaking, quantum.
yeah. Top-down also, there is a question: is it like is the movement in flatness like in 2D? Because then you could even use a 2D physics engine, which it's not necessary, but it would even be also how many players, how big the world is. So
Mm,
I mean top down means that you would not discard quantum in my opinion, because when you think about
mm,
a 3D first person or 3D or third person shooter, I would just say go fusion because of you would need lag compensation, and we only built that for fusion. And but if you're talking about 2D top down, or top down, maybe the aiming is in 2D, which means you can use full prediction for everything, and then quantum would shine with all the other stuff it does, like full replays, kill cam replays, and blah blah blah.
mm. Very good. Of course, like, do we have an example of a battle royale game? And we already had somebody in the community answer BR200. Well, yes.
So let me comment on this topic because it's a recurrent topic from Super Soup Games. So if you have any business related question, please send an email to developer@photonengine.com. But the point about 16 players in the room, it's we can clarify over email. It's not something super mandatory. It has to do with the different requirements of games and other types of applications. And no, as a 100-player game can be done and is can run over a single room. BR200, as people mentioned here, actually runs 200 players on the same game. That's all over a single room, but it is a
Mm.
game, right? So it's important to mention that. So for clarifications about what that 16 peer topic is, send an email to developer@photonengine.com.
Yes, let me type that out as well.
Yes.
So we can just copy paste it. There you go. Oh, it even highlighted our username because it's Photon Engine.
It is, yes. Me, if me and you type or you type, it's gonna be that. Yeah. If I type from the right, at least from the right
No, it's like in the message itself. The @photon engine is highlighted on top of that. That has
Oh,
nothing to do with
for
our
me it's
username
not.
itself.
For me it's not. But okay, great.
Anyway, so a lot of things here are like there are some texts that are very clearly better for some things than others, but oftentimes the question is more what are you building, and then you reverse engineer the requirements. So keep that in mind. And again, it's multiplayer, so smoke and mirrors is even more applicable here than it is in single player games. So we have one more question, Eric, that came in during the stream on the forum. Do you want to take that one still?
Let me take a look. Form. Where is my form? Here. Isn't this the one that I answered? It's the same one. I answered about 4-person co-op horror game.
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
I forgot about something. It is Unreal that he mentioned here.
Yes.
So unfortunately, neither Fusion or Quantum. If you wanna do it with Photon, you have to use Photon real time, which we have a lot of customers using in Unreal, right? But it's not really what I am a lot into. I mean, I like Unreal, but I'm not yet working on any product directly related to Unreal here.
Yeah. I have so many friends who use real time in Unreal, but I've never used it myself. I'm kind of ashamed of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a very active community around it as well. But unfortunately, that means neither quantum nor fusion at this point in time. It might change, of course, in the future, but
Yeah.
nobody knows what the future holds.
Yep. Oh. Yeah.
All
That.
right.
Good.
So, any last words you want to add, Eric?
No, I just hope you guys have enjoyed this stream. And yes, I mean, just a quick it's not really a shameless plug because it's not anything commercial, but for those of you who do not know, I'm also hosting a personal stream, not an official one I'm not posting the link here, but just go on over Discord and I am talking a lot about quantum. So if you have questions about quantum, you can also ask. We will have an official one, so maybe instead of doing that, let's do a reminder on the next
All right, of course. So
on the next stuff we'll have coming up in the next few
we
days.
have a lot, a lot of streams planned during the game jam, both to assist you as well as to showcase a couple of things you can and how to do them. As we know, some of you are new not only to Fusion and Quantum, but also to multiplayer in general. So tomorrow, this is unrelated to the jam, but we have a post-mortem on Fusion BR200. So any of you that are interested in large worlds and shooters, join. It's going to be quite interesting. We'll have the lead developer that joins us, as well as the other one who built most of the gameplay, and I will be interviewing them to better understand where we started from and what we actually did. So join in. That's going to be quite interesting. At the end of this week, we will follow up with another Q&A session for the Game Jam to assist you with any things that you have questions about, whether it's about your core loop or the tech itself. Join in. We will be answering live as usual. And of course, there will be a form as well that we'll post on both the Global Game Jam and the Photon Discord. If you have any questions you would like to submit because you can't join live, we will be taking your questions through there as well. And that is it for this week. We will follow then up next week with, well, more streams. Our colleague Luke will be joining and holding 2 Let's Jam streams showcasing how to build a couple of things with Fusion on Monday and then with Quantum Wednesday. This will then be followed up by a couple of other Q&A streams throughout the 2 last weeks of the Global Game Jam, multiplayer jam that we have. And finally, we will, of course, have a Let's Play session with Eric and a couple of other devs testing whichever games you desire to share with us and basically see how we play them, what we experience about them. That's going to be a bit more fun to close off
I have
this
a
month of programming and development.
I have a thoughts an optional request for that one here, which is, I mean, if you're gonna make a menu for your game, it means you're gonna hide completely what kind of tech you're using. I like to guess if the game is done with quantum or fusion. So Tim, when we do that one, please do not tell me, even if on the forum or something that the playable
Oh, we will not
has.
ask for that. That is oh well,
Yeah,
actually we do need to ask
yeah,
for it for statistic purposes. So well, never mind. But we won't tell you, I promise.
yeah. I'll see how many I get right and how many I get wrong. I already got one wrong on the channel
Yeah, I saw
on
that one.
Discord.
That one was
Yeah.
surprising, even to me.
It looked to me that the client on the other screen was predicting, so I assumed it was quantum because by default we predict everything. So in Fusion you have to actually act to have remote characters predicting, and it felt to me that they were, but maybe it was because it was tested on the same machine. I don't know.
So,
Yep,
you know,
yep,
surprise us is
yes,
basically what
exactly.
we're asking you. With that, Eric,
Thanks for
any last
joining.
words as we say
See,
goodbye?
no, just thank you for watching and see you guys next time.
Thank you, and see you all on Wednesday, hopefully, or Friday for more Q&A.